Hello, everyone. I am here today with Farida Nabourema and Marc Nda, co-chairs of the Togo Policy Institute, a nonprofit organization that works to highlight the broad range of human rights violations taking place in Togo. Many of our viewers will, of course, recognize Farida as having been on several of our previous programs, and I'm really pleased to introduce Marc to our audience, a first-time guest who will share some key insights today and going forward. So thank you so much, both, for joining us today.
Thank you for
Thank you.
having us.
Thank you, Jeff.
And of course, many people, even those listening today, might not realize that Togo, a coastal West African country of just over 9 million people, is home to the oldest autocracy in sub-Saharan Africa, a family dynasty, in effect, that has held power for over half a century. Despite this extended monopoly on power, Togo remains one of the world's least developed countries, ruled by a regime that has produced chronic poverty, systemic corruption, and a continued erosion of basic human freedoms, including a years-long ban on political rallies. Last weekend, Togolese citizens voted in senatorial elections, which, if you've read the news reports since then, might have seemed to be credible and perhaps even reflective of the will of the people. These surface level assessments, however, do not hew very close to the truth. So, with that said, Frida, I wanted to begin with you. Tell us about these so-called elections that took place last week and why many local activists and analysts are claiming that they amounted to nothing more than a charade orchestrated by the regime to perpetuate the status quo.
Thank you, Jeff. Well, I would like to give a bit of context to the audience before we even talk about the elections. So last year, the ruling party that has been in power in Togo for the past 60 years has unanimously decided to change our constitution. Overnight, the people of the ruling party met, and in the middle of the night, they came up with a new constitution, moving us from a presidential regime to a parliamentary regime. What this means is that the head of the government will now be appointed by the parliament in Togo. In the new constitution, they also introduced two chambers within the legislative. We're going to have a lower chamber and a higher chamber, which is going to be the Senate. While the Senate makes sense for nations that are federal nations like Germany, the United States, Nigeria, in order to promote federalism, Togo is not a federal nation, and this is a country of barely 8 million people. Nonetheless, they introduced the Senate, but then they had a very particular intention for doing that. In the new constitution, they mentioned that 1/3 of the members of the Senate will be appointed by the head of government. So in order to kind of like mislead the international community, what they did was to actually introduce a new position. So in addition to having the president of the republic, we are going to be having a new role that is going to be called the president of the Council of Ministers. Under parliamentary regimes, like it is in the UK, like it is in Canada, or in the African context, in Ethiopia or in Mauritius, the head of government is the prime minister. And then you have a president of the republic that occupies a more symbolic role, signing treaties, for example, or representing the state at international meetings, but then they have no power over governance. Well, in the case of Togo, they did something similar, but the dictator doesn't want to be called a prime minister. He still wants to hold on to the title of being a president. So he's introducing the position of a prime minister, but now that will be called the president of Council of Ministers. But they have an intention by doing that. They got really smart. So what they did was to actually fund an international campaign by recruiting so-called journalists internationally that publicized vastly that Togo has a new constitution, and in their new constitution, the president will only serve 1 term. And the world started clapping by calling this very progressive, by saying that finally, we have an African president that doesn't want to elongate his tenure, and that is willing to only spend 1 term in power, which is unheard of. Well, the interesting thing is that the president of the republic, indeed, under the new constitution, will only serve 1 term, a 6-year 1 term. They also elongated the term from 5 years to 6 years. However, the president of Council of Ministers, that actually will be the one appointing the cabinet and will have the full control over the state, who will be the real head of state, can be appointed for a lifetime. There is no limit to the president of the Council of Ministers. Now, Under this new constitution, we are going to have a new president of the republic. And what the regime is trying to do is to sell the narrative that there has been change in Togo. Togo now has a new president, while in reality, Gnassingbe's plan is to move from the position of president of the republic, which they have emptied of all powers, to now become the president of Council of Ministers, where he can serve for life, where he doesn't even need to be elected, and where 1/3 of the members of parliament that will be selecting him as the head of state are going to be appointed by himself. So technically, this is what led to the new election that we are seeing today. Gnassingbe became president after doing a coup when his father died in 2005. And he spent 20 years in power. And last week was the 20th year commemoration of his father's death, on which they spent billions of taxpayers' money to commemorate the death of his father, who ruled the country for 38 years. And now he's moving towards becoming the president of Council of Ministers in Togo, which is literally the new title they have found for the dictator in Togo. So I'm calling on the international community and the world to watch out and to not fall for the narrative that Togo is going to be having a new president. We are going to be having a decorative president and then a dictator who's going to come with a new title called President of Council of Ministers. So this election charade that they put together saw the opposition boycott it massively, of course. They attributed themselves more than 90% of the seats as usual. And they ordered to select the 2/3 of that Senate for that Senate. And they are introducing a new position in Togo, which we have never had, which is the position of governors. And the interesting thing in Togo is that we don't have proper decentralization. And for this regime, decentralization means just creating new positions. And it's very laughable. So this is a country where we have traditional rulers. So we have neighborhood kings. Initially in our customs, we do have kingdom, and people organize themselves around kingdom, around different tribes. But during the French colonial era, the French government actually removed the traditional rulers, and then they appointed their own rulers, and they called them chef canton. And they built them under the French communities called canton in French, which is the equivalent of a county in the United States. Now, in our tradition, we don't have county kings. The kings are the rulers of specific tribes, but then the French created counties, and then they appointed authoritarian rulers just to help them collect taxes from the community. So they have county kings. Now in Togo, we do have the county kings that are considered as traditional rulers, which are all appointed by the ruling party. And then we have the neighborhood kings, which are also appointed by the ruling party. And then we have the mayors. And in addition to the mayors, we have the prefects, which are actually the prefectorates are also some administrative communities built by the state. And now in addition to the prefects, we have the governors. Now, we don't really know which one of those have which power because they have not been clearly delimited. We have only seen these as ways for the government to inflate positions in governance just to justify paying millions of our taxpayers' money to the cronies that are ruling the party with them. So we have the community, the neighborhood kings and the county kings and the mayors and the prefects and the governors. And this is a country of barely 30,000 square miles and 8 million people.
Wow. Thank you so much, Farida, for that really extensive and a really important background for people to begin to wrap their heads around the ongoing situation in Togo. And Marc, I want to bring you in here because you recently discussed a lot of this in an article you had published, a really great article that I would encourage people to check out in the Africa Report. And I want to quote something, pull out a quote that you had in there in which you said, thousands of political prisoners languish in detention, and extrajudicial killings and kidnappings are common tools of state control. The climate of fear and oppression is pervasive, leaving many Togolese citizens disillusioned and despondent. So, Marc, I wanted to ask you, what are the real-life consequences of this state of affairs in the country, and how do they extend beyond Togo's borders? In other words, why should people listening today care about what's happening in your country? I'd love your thoughts on that.
Thank you, Jeff. And then, honestly, I'm very proud of Farida and the background that she just gave. I can't compete with that. I wouldn't want to do that. So I'm going to try to go in a low rater under her. Um, Yes, as Farida just said, there are this dictatorship. To add to the background, is not just a 20-year dictatorship. It is since the founding father, Sylvanus Olympio, has been killed by for Isosina Gnassingbe father. Uh, uh, that's when the nightmare of the Togolese has started, right? And everybody thought that after the death of his father, a young a fella like him, when he come into power, is going to bring a lot of change. He's going to care about the young people. Instead, he has ruled with fear, jailing people, kidnapping people, killing people, and it has a lot of consequences. He has also suppressed people for talking about what is happening in Togo, and we don't have a freedom of expression anymore. People live in poverty. Our poverty level is over 50%. It's actually 51% right now. People are not eating right. People are not drinking. We don't have clean water. We don't have electricity. You know, yesterday the electricity was cut down like at least 2 times yesterday. So there are a lot of consequences when it comes to that in the country. We live in a country where we only have one main road, which was built in the 1980s. Uh, we live in a country where we have a hospital that doesn't have a scanner, that doesn't have a blood bank, that doesn't have oxygen. You have to buy your own material before you go to hospital. We live in a country where um, there is more than 50% of chance to die in a hospital when you go to have a birth of a child. We live in a country where corruption has become the norm because that government reward corruption than people who fight against corruption. Because if you are corrupted and they have something against you, they want you in the team. Togo has become a hub of a drug dealing. Recently, we have seen on the news that a lot of drug has been seized all over around the world from ship that are coming from Togo or are going to Togo. So consequences that young people right now are like zombies in a country where they stand sleeping, standing. All they do is use drug, drink. There is no job. The unemployment is over 47%, and that's just the tips of the iceberg consequences that we can talk about in the country. Uh, Outside of the country, why should people care? Right now, on the border of Burkina Faso, we have terrorists that have a hub there that are there comfortably attacking Burkina Faso and Togo at the same time, right? The more they grow, the more dangerous it becomes for our neighboring country. Um, why do United States, for example, should care, and why would the other country surrounding Togo in West Africa should care? Togo, if we go back and then to the history, Togo was one of the first country that started coup d'etat in Africa, and it became the norm in West Africa. Togo was the first country to start the constitutional coup, right? It became a norm in some country. Togo has been the first country to pretend to um, live in a democratic country, but use the legislation power to change the constitution to suit the government that is living there. So we have seen that spread around West Africa and beyond that. Now, when it comes to America, as I think it is very dangerous, it become a national security for United States. And we've seen that happen when Boko Haram find a heaven in Nigeria, how it has affected many country like United States. Ships were seized, right? They have taken in hostage many ships and many many people from the West. And that is, and Togo has been for a long time a very strategic point, a very strategic country in West Africa. Togo is a tipping bomb. It's a ticking bomb, right? It is going to explode one way or another. And when that explodes, everybody is going to feel the heat. The neighboring country would have to take people who are fleeing the country. The West would have to chip to create peace, right? Spend money there. And it is going to be a safe haven for terrorists. It's going to be a safe haven for terrorists. Just also to explain also why United States should care about Togo and West Africa. I think I said this in the article that you are talking about, where the few year that we have seen in Mali, in Niger, in Burkina Faso, just to name the two of the five that I know, that I can remember right now, a coup d'etat. And how did that happen? It has happened with the support of Russia. And we all know that Russia has been the biggest foe for the United States, right? And currently, they are still helping them, financing them. And right now, as I'm talking to you, we know there are some group of Togolese that are seeking the help of Russia to try to overthrow the government in Togo. Because when people are desperate, they use desperate measure to solve that problem. And United States should care about Togo. That's the reason why United States should care. It is a national security issue.
Thank you so much, Mark. I really appreciate that insight, and I think both you and Farida have laid out the context and the current situation in a really great way to segue to some more recent events. So I wanted to ask you both about the case last month, I believe, in January, of 14 individuals in Togo being sentenced to 10 years in prison for participating in anti-government protests dating back to 2018, which means they'd already spent 6 years behind bars. And I believe, according to local civil society groups and media, 92 others were arrested during this time period and also remain jailed to this day as we're speaking here now. This, of course, has actually been condemned by global luminaries, including Mary Lawler, who's the UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights Defenders. So I wanted to ask both of you, maybe Mark, you first, just to continue on what you were saying, and then Frida, how how is this regime able to get away with these ongoing egregious injustices while facing no consequences or accountability? I think particularly of regional leaders in ECOWAS, those who continually stand up as democratic standard bearers in the region, or at least proclaim to be. Why are there no consequences for these actions? Mark, to you first, and then Farida, would love your thoughts on this as well.
Well, that's a good question. Jeff, I can assure you that if you go to the three neighboring countries in Togo, Benin, Ghana, and Burkina Faso, and you ask them about Togo, they will say everything is good. Why? Because this government has spent our fortune in PR in trying to convince people that we live in peace. They have starved us. They have jailed us. They have scared us to a point where we can't even talk. And we became like, even when we are outside of the country, we are so scared to talk about our problem because this government is so good in tracking people even outside of the country to either kill them or destroy their life. So that's why people outside of the country think that everything is good in Togo, right? If our neighboring country think that everything is good, it is because of the work that we are doing now to try to counter the government, that people like in Benin, in Ghana, and in Burkina Faso start understanding that, wow, is that how Togo has always been? Now it makes sense to me how why we have a lot of Togolese in our country taking lower job. And the 15 people that you are talking about, Jeff, keep in mind that most of them never seen a judge for 3 to 5 years. And there are still people in that jail that have never seen a judge for 10 years. People have spent 5, 6, 10 years, 15 years for an offense that in our book could be 3 months, 6 months, right? And this government, like I said, has spent so much fortune in PR trying to be the peacemaker. Every time there is a struggle in another country, they volunteer to go and then negotiate peace, right? So that's the main reason. Now, when we talk about these 15 people, a reminder that all these people has been sentenced in a trial that is less than 2 hours together without proof. It is that say, you say. No proof has been presented. And those people have been sentenced between 10 to 15 years. Between 10 to 15 years. This government is so good every time that some courageous people come out to protest. They finance a group of people that come out with machetes, stick, gun that they use against the protester, right? In order to evade the international court to say that it is a legitimate defense. And they kill people. I don't know. A reminder is there was a blood of more than 1,500 people that has been shed before FAR came to power in overnight, including a pregnant woman that were thrown in a river. So this is the reason why these people fly around the world, travel, come to United States with impunity, money, PR. They currently have a PR that is pay millions of dollars in Washington to try to clean their image. If you go to Wikipedia right now and you search about our president, who supposedly has went to school in the United States and get his diploma there, you will see the message that Wikipedia will tell you. There is no background at all. So it is PR. That's the whole reason.
Right. Thank you, Mark. And Farida, over to you. I want to give you an opportunity to expand on that as well. And I know you and I have talked quite a bit in the past about how this lobbying and PR for dictators manifests in Washington and other capitals around the world and the consequences for the people on the ground for that. If you could maybe pick up on that thread a bit in some of your comments. Farida, you're on mute. If you could unmute yourself.
Okay, yeah, apologies. So in the case of Togo, they do invest massively in PR and in lobbying, but then they also do work closely with some institutions that are based in the West that actually help them in cleansing their image. You have institutions like the Tony Blair Foundation that works very closely with them. And then you have institutions like the Chatham House, for example, in the UK that also works very closely with them. And then you have many other organizations out there that are supposed to be think tanks working on development issues, that are promoting good governance, when in the end, they get paid hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars, just to organize events in the West that are helping these regimes sanitize their image, that are helping them position themselves as legitimate and progressive and democratic. And this is actually hurting all the efforts that the activists in Togo have been leading just to bring attention on the human rights violations that are happening in the country. Like Marc said, for example, for the 14 people that were sentenced to very heavy prison sentences over the past years, these people have been held in some of the most horrendous conditions for several years without being presented to a judge even once, without even being told why they were arrested, without any charges being brought against them. And then overnight, they collected all of them, took them to court, and then sent them there to 10 to 15 years in prison just because they were protesting against the regime's brutality and were demanding the reinstatement of term limits in the constitution back in 2017 and 2018. There has been no respect of due process, and some of them were not even given lawyers during their trials. And the reason why they gave them such heavy sentences is to actually justify why they have spent 4, 5, 6, 7 years in prison with no trial, because it's illegal and it is a violation of international law. In addition to that, we also witness a situation in the case of Togo where there is a tendency from Western nations, especially from the United States and the EU, to try to polish the regime, because they are in a situation where they have seen a lot of governments across the region getting closer to Russia, especially after the nations in the Sahel, which eventually turned to Russia to be able to provide guns and resources for them to continue their struggle against terrorism. But then this has led the region, other countries in the West, to now see dictatorships like Togo as being sensitive subjects. Like, they don't want to frustrate the Togolese government out of fear that they too may become closer to Russia. But the reality is that it is rather their support of autocratic governments for decades, of regimes that absolutely have no respect of rule of law, of regimes that have shown a level of insensitivity towards human rights and that have been extremely corrupt, that has led people to stop believing in democracy, that have led people to stop believing in Western democracy, that have led people to even radicalizing against the West. So what they are doing is to just prove the people of Togo right when they say, you don't care about democracy, when you are supporting regimes and you are closing your eyes on a regime that is continuously violating democratic principles on broad daylight, and there are no consequences for them. Mind you, Togo has been ruled by an autocratic regime for more than any other African nation in sub-Saharan Africa. We have been under the same family for 60 years. Nonetheless, we have never had a situation where Togolese military officials were ever sanctioned, even once, for their human rights atrocities, even though the United Nations itself conducted investigation that actually asserted that the ruling government in Togo has massacred hundreds of civilians. There has been no sanctions against them. There has been no action against them. There has been no visa restriction against them, as we have seen them doing it with other nations. So at some level, the citizens in Togo feel like, do we really matter as human beings? How come we see them taking strong stances against dictators doing similar things, or even doing things that are less horrifying than what the regime is doing in Togo? And then they get sanctions, and then they get visa restrictions, and their assets get frozen. But in the case of Togo, there is a complete impunity. They continue traveling to the US, traveling to the EU, having access to international forums, parading even sometimes as mediators in regional conflicts, receiving awards in the West, in the United States, in France, in the UK, despite their record of horrendous crimes against humanity and crimes against Togolese citizens. Well, that is the question that we are asking. Do we really matter as citizens and as people in Togo?
Thank you so much, Farida. And when we're sitting here discussing these egregious rights violations that are taking place in the country with impunity, as both you and Marc have really eloquently pointed out, one particular case that really struck me recently, and it was brought to my attention by you, I saw you talking about it on social media, is the case of Francois Agba and her family members who have been unlawfully abducted and detained by Togolese authorities. I wanted to ask you, what is the background there? I think it's important to put a face on the struggle, and so often we talk about human rights violations in the abstract. And her case in particular really struck me, and I think it will really resonate with people who are listening to this show. But also, in addition to that, I wanted to ask, how can people get involved to speak up about these injustices, these ongoing crimes against humanity that you and Marc, again, have both highlighted? How can we use our voices in a meaningful way, namely those of us on the outside looking in? How can we be helpful in all of this?
Thank you, Jeff. Well, the case of Françoise Agba is one of the cases of grave injustice that we have witnessed in Togo. So Mrs. Françoise Agba is the widower of a Togolese dissident called Bertin Agba. Back in 2013, Bertin Agba was arrested he's a businessman, he's a business mogul from Togo that had issues with the government, and then he got arrested, tortured severely. His torture was so bad that he was at some point dying, and they transferred him to the public hospital, where they handcuffed him on his hospital bed and maintained him there at the hospital for months. Eventually, Bertin Agba, being a business mogul and being an extremely affluent man, managed to escape, and he ran away and went on living in South Africa in exile. And he lived in South Africa in exile till 2023, when all of a sudden he passed away abruptly. Due to several reports, he suffered from poisoning, but we don't have any data indicating how it happened, but then we just know that he died very abruptly. Now, last year in 2024, a year on the first year anniversary of his death, his wife and his siblings and his children decided to go to Togo to commemorate his 1 year anniversary, because he died in exile and he was buried in exile. So they decided to do an event in Togo to commemorate him. And they came back to Togo, and the government of Togo arrested all of them. His two brothers, his spouse, and his son. And his son was a student in France. Eventually, after some time, they let go of the son, who I believe was 24 years old. And then they kept the brothers and the widow. Now, the widow, Françoise Agba, is a breast cancer survivor who has been through surgeries, chemotherapy, and was on remission. But then she was due for another follow-up surgery when she was arrested. And ever since, she has been denied of treatment. The family has even requested that her personal doctor attend to her just to make sure that her cancer is not coming back and not progressing, but they have refused to give her proper medical treatment. For the past month, she is being detained, not even in prison, but in a private detention center like they do with people. She has not been presented to the judge till today. She has not been allowed to see her lawyers. And the very few times that the family managed to get in touch with them, all they were told is that the family needed to go and beg the president. In what country, when you have rule of law, does the president decide on arresting a widower and the family has to go and beg the president for her release? She's been in prison, being denied of treatment. Her health is getting worse by the day. And all appeals to the regime to let her go have been completely unsuccessful. The only crime this woman committed is to be married to someone that the regime considered an enemy. That is her only crime. And it is the same thing for her brother-in-laws that are in prison with them. They came to mourn their family member and they got arrested for that.
Thank you, Farida.
And to expand on that, keep in mind that when she was arrested with the family members, the lawyer called the prosecutor, right? The top prosecutor, who said, I don't know why she was arrested. Call where she was detained, and people who arrested, they said the order came from the boss, meaning the president. So I just want to expand on that, they didn't know why she was arrested, and she was detained for, I believe, 6 weeks before she got charged for national security, or attempt to breach something like about national security, terrorism, or something like that.
Right. I mean, Farida, hearing you talk about this case, it almost reminds me when you're mentioning the collective punishment aspect of it, and essentially forcing family members to publicly apologize or seek some sort of forgiveness from the president. It reminds me of a lot of the stories I've heard from Rwanda, actually. Yeah,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
they force
Yes.
families to go physically and in writing to sort of bow before the president and beg for forgiveness, beg for clemency in some cases. And Rwanda, of course, and Paul Kagame get a lot of attention, but again, Togo does not. But wrapping up here, and Marc, I just wanted to go back to you really quickly just to ask if there's anything we left out, if there's anything really important you wanted to add to this conversation before we close it out.
Yes, you ask how people can fight, help this fight. Beside the Togo Policy Institute, we have, and I mentioned that in my article, Le Train de la Liberté, that people can join and try to speak out. We give a voice to people to speak out about what is happening in Togo. We try to expose the government with all the thing that the government is doing. We try to share information. And then this is also a movement that is working hard to try to have people's voice heard, and then to try to make changes in Togo. it is so difficult to be in Togo and then talk about the politic. Keep in mind that it was almost a month that one of our brother got kidnapped in the daylight and currently is in prison because he's an activist. So we ask people to join the Train de la Liberté to help us one way or another to try to peacefully make changes. We believe in uprising in Togo, and we believe it's coming. It's a ticking bomb, like I said, and it is going to happen. The question is, where would the West be when that change comes? We have our website. People can contact us at info@letraindelaliberté.com. Our website is in the making. It is going to come in the next few weeks, and we will publish that. We'll share that with you guys
I think it
because
actually goes beyond when the people needed them, they were not there. I think it is much deeper than that. It wasn't just the work closing its eyes on the suffering of the people, but it is rather most of the Western powers participating in the
really,
exploitation of those people, supporting dictators, endorsing dictators, and helping them simply because those dictators were seen as being anti-Russian or were seen as being anti-leftism and anti-communism. So in the Western struggle against communism, they supported capitalist dictators. But then at the end of the day, whether the authoritarian government is a capitalist regime or a communist regime, when people's rights are being tampered with, when people are being denied their basic human rights, their freedom of speech, freedom of association, their right to elect their leaders, regardless of the economic model of the nation, they are going to revolt because nobody wants to live under a tyrannical regime, whether it is a communist regime or a capitalist regime. Dictatorship and authoritarianism are completely unacceptable and cruel to humanity.
say no more, Jeff.
Absolutely. I think these conversations are a continual reminder that the yearning for human freedom is universal, regardless of whether it's in Togo or the United States with a lot of what we're experiencing here now today. And I think solidarity is needed now, certainly more than ever in these dire times that we're witnessing globally. So thank you so much to both of you for joining me today and talking about the events unfolding in your country. Our team at the Resistance Bureau really appreciates all that you have been doing over the years, really, to shed light on the situation in Togo, as well as informing us on how to raise our voices, get involved in a meaningful way. And we look forward to learning more about the Togo Policy Institute going forward and the work you'll certainly be doing in this regard. In the meantime, our team wishes you continued strength and solidarity. And as I mentioned, we really look forward to future conversations. Take good care in the meantime, and please continue to be safe in all that you do. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Jeff.